All right. Who's ready for class? Yeah. Man, every single class today is so low energy. What is it? Somebody tell me, what is it?
Homecoming.
Is it homecoming? But isn't homecoming supposed to be exciting and fun?
I'm just tired.
You're tired? But why is everybody that in my classes tired today?
I don't know.
I don't know what homecoming
It's
is.
Thursday.
Yeah, neither do I. Any reason?
I mean, there were some exams the last couple days.
Okay, maybe that's it. Like midterms or something? No, I guess it's past midterms.
Yeah.
Huh. I don't know. Everybody seems tired. Maybe it's the wind. I did see someone get blown off a skateboard today. Was there any of you? None of you? Okay, I was scared as one of my students. I just didn't recognize you because we all wear masks. I laughed so hard at that student. It was mean. But yeah, no, the wind was so strong that they were just skateboarding along, and the wind started blowing, and it started speeding them up, and they just ate it so bad. And man, it was funny. Anyway, that's why I don't skateboard, because I would just do the same, and I'd really laugh at me. Did we have any problems last time left over? Numbers I assigned? No. These are just online, right? I need to introduce 7.4 today, so the last 5 rules. But before I do that, any questions on 7.3, on anything we've covered so far? Anybody have difficulties you need to address?
I think I had a problem on one of the past homeworks that I just couldn't quite figure out.
Sure. Do you want to come put it up on the board?
Yeah, it was 7.2, and it's just one. But it was really annoying. And then the conclusion is supposed to be S, but then you're supposed to figure out this last premise here to get that conclusion.
Oh, okay. Yeah. This one's 7.2?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just say we could use any of our rules. Just to make it easier. Okay. I want you to read it out loud. Like, read all the premises out loud to yourself.
Alright. S then E, E or S and P, not E, therefore S.
Okay. Do you see what you could do from that?
Well, here's the thing. Not E there is in those tones to get not S.
Uh-huh.
And then not E there gives you S and P.
Good.
But you don't have S, so you probably don't have P. You need both.
Mm-hmm.
So then how do you end up with S?
That's, I see your reasoning, but you're thinking that's a disjunctive syllogism there, where it's not. That's an and. So that says S and P are true.
I mean, but either way, you still don't have S.
Right. But then the next line is saying you do have S and P. So that's a contradiction, right? So you could simplify S from S and P, right? And that would give you your conclusion. That's all you need. But the contradiction there is just because it's it's not invalid.
So I could just ignore this. Like, that was one thought. I could
Exactly.
just ignore that and then get the S and P.
Right.
But then what do I get here, even if I use simplification?
Yeah, you would just have to get S and P and then simplify. Yeah.
So that would be that next premise?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But I see where you're thrown off because this does result in a contradiction. But again, do you remember, from a contradiction you could prove anything, right? So it's technically not invalid, it's just a shitty argument.
Okay.
Yeah. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Anybody else have a problem you want to do? Or you need to do? Because you're having a hard time? Come on, last chance. I offer help, basically tutoring during class. Come on. Anyone? So if I get the test results back and they're not very good, don't blame me. Is anybody struggling? Does anybody want to go over anything in particular? Okay. I'm going to introduce the last 5 rules. We're about to finish our system of logic. Let me write them on the board, actually, so I can just do proofs. Oh, no, I'll write them on the chalkboard for the recording. Okay. Last chance. Questions? Anything you want to go over? Okay, then I'm doing it. 7.4. We've got our last 5 rules. I'll start with transposition. Transposition goes like this. If P implies Q, that's the same thing as saying that not Q implies not P. Why is that true?
Because if you deny the right side, you would deny the left.
Right. So remember necessary and sufficient conditions? Which one's necessary, which one's sufficient here?
Right side is necessary.
Right side's necessary, left side's sufficient. What this is saying is that Q is necessary for P. And that means if you didn't have Q, you wouldn't have P, right? So these are just 2 ways of saying the same thing. That's the idea behind transposition. Questions on this one?
So did you just flip them?
Yeah, you flip them and negate both sides. Yeah, so Q goes on the left, P goes on the right, and then you negate both. Yeah. What?
I think I'm confusing myself. So P then Q, or yeah, P then Q,
Mm-hmm.
and then if you don't have Q, then you do not have P.
Yeah. These are the same things.
Okay, so they're the same, they're just the negated.
Right. Yeah, they're just like different ways of writing the same thing. You have to have Q in order to have P.
But since you don't have Q, you don't have P.
Exactly, yeah. Any other questions on this one? We good? Okay. Here is, I'll do another easy one. Tautology. What's a tautology?
It's always true.
It's always true. Something that's like trivially true. It's just always true. Well, here's an uninteresting tautology. P is the same thing as saying P and P. Why is that true? Why is this a tautology?
Because it's pretty much the same premise, they're always true.
Yeah, they're really just saying the same things, right? P is true and P is true. That's the same thing as me just saying P is true. I'm just repeating myself because I'm a crazy person, right? Do you see how these are the same? Okay, here's another one. P is the same as P or P. Why is that true? Why are those the same?
For the same reason.
For the same reason, you're not repeating it with an and though. Can somebody in English explain to me why this is the same as this?
Are you saying like it can be this or that?
Uh-huh.
If you have one, but it's true.
Okay, good. Yeah. What were you thinking?
No, I was gonna go off of that, but you said explaining in English was like this or that, but since you have that, so you have this? Or
Yeah, kind of. So this is saying this or this, right? This or that.
this
Well, what are your 2 options?
The same thing.
same.
It's P, right? So if this option happens, I have P, and if this option happens, I have P. So I just have P. Yeah. Make sense? Okay. Again, I told these last 5 rules are not hard. Let's see, what's the next one? Exportation. Okay, if I say, if I have P and I have Q, then I have R. If I have P and I have Q, then I have R. What does that mean?
If you have P and Q, then you'll have R.
Right. P and Q together are sufficient for R, right? Well, couldn't I phrase that in another way? I could say, look, if I had P, then if I also had Q, then I would have R. Right? This says if I have P and I have Q, then I have R. This says if I have P, then if I also have Q, then I have R. Do you see how those are the same? Two different ways of writing the same thing. Any questions? All right. Last two. I'll do material equivalence first. Let's call this one a quiv. Somebody tell me, what does the double arrow or the triple bar in the book mean? When I say, what? If and only if? Good. What's if and only if mean?
They both have to happen at the same time for the other to happen.
Close. Very close. It's a little bit different though. How would you say it? Try it one more time.
They are both like sufficient and necessary conditions.
Good, yeah. They will always go together, and if you don't have one, you don't have the other. They're always going to match truth values, right? Well, the reason I do the double arrow is just to show you that it's just an arrow that goes both ways, right? This is sufficient for this, and this is sufficient for this. The arrow is going both ways. We can say the double arrow literally just means an arrow going both ways. P if and only if Q means P then Q and Q then P. That's why I don't use the triple bar. Question on this one? Does everybody understand why this is true? P double arrow Q is the same as saying P then Q and Q then P. Good?
Can you also write it like P and Q or not Q and not P?
Yeah, exactly. So the other form of this is going to be basically saying P and Q or not P and not Q. Okay, why did these work? Why are these the same?
Because you either have it or you don't, and they're both necessary and sufficient for each other.
Right, exactly. You either have it or you don't. So if I have this one, it's going to be accompanied by having this one. So if I have one of them, I'm going to have the other. So let's say I have one. The two possibilities are I have one of them or I have both of them, essentially. The other possibility is I don't have either of them, because they always have to be together. Always true or always false together. Good. Okay. Questions on equivalence? Okay, here's the last rule. I mean, congratulate yourselves. This is it. We're about to be done with propositional logic. You'll have learned the whole system of propositional logic and never have to start over again. It'll be amazing. Implication or material implication. This is what I've talked about a few times as the definition of the material conditional, or the arrow, or the horseshoe. What it says is that what we really mean by P then Q is just that, not P or Q. Why is this what we really mean by the arrow?
Because if you have Q, then, well, because if you deny Q, then you deny P. And so you need Q and you don't have P.
Okay, that's correct. Does it help you understand why those are the same? For anybody? Kind of, yeah. To me, this is something I've always just struggled with, but this is how I look at it. Okay. What happens if you De Morgan's this?
You get not Q and P.
P and not Q, but then a negation on the outside. What does this mean? Sorry, it's a bad and. This means that you can't have both P and not Q. You can't have both P and not Q. This is saying, look, if I have P, every time I have P, it's going to be accompanied by Q. Right? I cannot have P and fail to have Q. Which is another way of saying, it's not the case that P and not Q can be true at the same time. You can never have it where P is true and Q is still false, if this is true. Right? So these two are the same exact thing. Right? And this one is the same as the conditional, so this one must be too. What the conditional says is that P will guarantee a Q. I will never have a case of P and not have a case of Q. It's not the case that I will have a case of P and not a case of Q, which is the same as this. Okay. Question on implication. All right, that's it. Like, that's all of the rules. That's all 18 rules. We're done learning new rules. The only thing left in the class is to practice with them, to take the test, and then we'll start learning about probability theory and basically like the other half of human reasoning, which is probabilistic reasoning or inductive reasoning. We'll get into that in a lot of detail. All right, questions? None? We good? Who's got an argument to share?
When is that extra credit due? Sorry, that just reminded me of that.
Next week, yeah, you have to have all three of them compiled and done by,
Okay.
I think it's the 2nd or the 5th? Can't remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if it passed already.
Yeah, no, it didn't. Yeah, check that email on Canvas that has the dates on it. But yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head. Anybody got an argument? None? None? At all? All right, well, if nobody has an argument, then I guess we could just be boring and do practice.
I have an argument. I just didn't finish because
Yeah. You want to come? Let's try to finish it together then. Yeah.
I would also share mine, but mine are too long to get.
Yeah.
I tried.
It's okay. It's hard. Sometimes your arguments are really long.
write it out and then.
Yeah, you could write it out for us and then we'll get to translating it.
True.
This sounds like a personal dispute with somebody from real experience. Yeah? Either she's stupid or lacks common sense. That's great. Who's your friend's name? What's your friend's name? Do you want us to say it for the camera recording? Call him out. Okay. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I know. See, it's not so easy to be writing on the board all day. Okay, cool. Okay, explain your argument to us before you translate it.
So I said people lack common sense. If I told my friend a true story and she doesn't see where I'm coming from, then either she's stupid or she just lacks common sense. Well, I know she's not stupid, therefore she lacks common sense.
Cool. Good. It makes sense to me, right? You think it's valid? What is your conclusion?
She lacks common sense.
She lacks common sense. So if the conclusion is she as in your friend lacks common sense, is this argument valid? Raise your hand if you think it's valid. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, well, let's test it. How would you translate this into symbols?
Maybe wrong. I wrote this whole thing saying that.
Okay, it's okay. Okay, let's start over.
I think
I see exactly what you're trying to do, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so let's just represent, so remember, each proposition or each truth claim is a single letter, right? So people lack common sense, that's one proposition, right? One truth claim? So we'll just represent that with P. Yeah. Okay, so that's people lack common sense. Now 2, if I told my friend a true story, what do you want to say I told my friend a true story? What letter should I pick for that?
T.
T. Okay. So we'll say, if I told my friend a true story, T.
She doesn't see where I'm coming from.
And she doesn't see where you're coming from. Good. Then, either she is stupid, and you're gonna, I would say S is she's stupid, right? So you wouldn't have the negation there. It'd just be S, she's stupid.
She's stupid
Yeah.
or she
Or she does
doesn't have common sense.
not have common sense. Good, that would be then a negation.
And then I
Doesn't
said,
have common sense.
She's not stupid. And then I said, therefore, she does not have common sense.
Okay. So first thing on 2, group those into parentheses. So there's left and right. Good. Okay. Now the question is it valid in this current form? Everybody take a look at this form, tell me, is this valid? Raise your hand if you think it's valid. Anyone?
Well, for the or at least, it's only false whenever it's both false. Sorry, does that make sense? So that's where I was struck. I don't know if it's valid or not, but I just remember if there's 2 false with an or, that's the only time it's false.
Right, so we wouldn't be able to like do a modus tollens or something there at all, yeah. So, anybody else have thoughts?
I don't think that was currently set up, there's any way to isolate C on its own.
Yeah, so the issue you just pointed out is that it doesn't seem like there's a way to get C or not C by itself yet. So it would technically be invalid. But now it's not invalid because your argument's invalid. It's invalid because you didn't actually write down your full argument. Why? But it's okay that you didn't write it because that's normal, right? I talked at the beginning of this. On both of them, yeah. So, what are you presuming when you tell the story? Look, if I told my friend a true story and she doesn't see where I'm coming from, then she's either stupid or lacks common sense. She's not stupid, therefore she lacks common sense. What does that? Aren't you assuming that you told her the story, and she didn't see where you're coming from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is really true. When I told her the story and it was true, like she didn't see like how it was true, I guess I could explain.
Yeah.
And when I was trying to explain it to her, like she just wasn't, like it wasn't clicking. And I was like, okay, well I know you're not stupid, so it's just, she just wasn't seeing my point, which was
Right.
the only point that there could have been to make this story true.
Yeah.
So
Hidden in your argument is a presumption that you did tell her your story and that she didn't see where you're coming from, right? So we can add premise 4.
okay.
And that it's basically like a hidden premise.
Wait, you want me to erase
Yeah, you can erase the line, that's fine.
I think you also have the issue of like saying having the people lack common sense as its own premise, because then you don't even use it throughout the whole argument when it kind of makes a part of the argument.
Right. Yeah, I'll get into that in 1 second. So for 4, you could put T and not D.
C and not what?
Not D. And now, what does that say on 4? So T was that you told your friend a true story,
And she does not see where I'm coming
right? So 4, now you're saying, you're making explicit, I did tell her a story and she didn't see where I'm coming from. Now that argument's valid. How can you prove it?
from. This is where I'm lost.
Yeah. So you can draw your line. So for 5, focus on 2 and 4. What does 2 say?
C and not D, then S and not C.
Yeah. Or S or not C, yeah. And then what does 4 say?
C and not D.
Good.
So then S or not C.
Exactly. Good. And that was MP or modus ponens for that one. Yeah. Okay.
But I don't have, I can put not S.
Well, you already have not S on 3, right? Yeah.
So I don't need to, oh wait.
You don't need to rewrite it, but you can use it.
Because if I don't have S on 3, if T and not D, then that's another, I mean S or not C. So I can say like, not S would go here.
So you already have not S on 3 above, so you don't need to rewrite that. But look at 5 and look at 3, which you.
Right.
So that says I have to have either S or not C, but you don't have S, right?
So I don't have C.
Yeah, exactly. You have not C, or you don't have C, whatever you want to say. There you go. And that would be 5, 3. Do you remember the rule for that one? It's okay if you don't. You don't. But look, it's DS, or destructive syllogism. Good. Okay, so your argument's valid. You just proved it's valid, right? So it's a good argument. It makes sense. And I mean, it has all true, I would think, all true premises, right? I guess, is it, if she didn't understand where you're coming from, is it really true that she's stupid or doesn't have common sense?
She doesn't have common sense.
Okay, well, just grant 2, 3, she's not stupid. Let's assume that your friend's not stupid. So the conclusion would follow, she doesn't have common sense. So it would be valid, likely sound, if you could prove 2. But now there's one more problem with the argument, and it's just that, what did 1 have to do with anything? Did you need 1?
I mean, not really. I was just starting a sentence.
Right.
I mean, people really do lack common sense, but
Yeah.
I was just starting a sentence off.
Yeah. And that's totally fine. That's how a normal person talks. Yeah. Just for the sake of your argument, you just probably wouldn't include 1 in it. P. Yeah, because you don't need it. But yeah, most times, if you're writing a paper, or if you're talking to a normal person that has been brainwashed by this class, they'll say something like, oh, people lack common sense. Here's an illustration of how people lack common sense. This story about my friend, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So good job. I mean, yeah, you did it. You came up with a valid argument. It was just hard symbolizing it, right? But good. Good job. Great. Yay. Okay. Anybody else have an argument or anything? You want to give one?
I mean, mine's pretty basic, but
Come on up and give it. Let's see it. You should send a recording of the class to your friend.
like, it's a bit short, is that?
Yeah, that's fine. Let's just see what you can come up with.
It's not just her. A lot of my friends don't have common sense. Sorry, my handwriting's short.
It's okay. Okay, good. Yeah, clearly valid, right?
Yeah.
So if Max is a dog, then Max barks. If Max barks, then he's brave. Therefore, if Max is a dog, then he's brave. Yeah. Good. It's a valid argument. Now, sound? Is 1 true? I don't know. Is it? Think about it. Is it true that if Max is a dog, then Max will bark? No. Why?
Not all dogs can bark.
Not all dogs can bark. And even dogs who can bark sometimes don't bark. I have one of my dogs that doesn't bark. He howls and he talks like a weird person. I hate him. But yeah, so 1's false, so it won't end up being sound. But it's valid, so good, yeah. I mean, these simplistic arguments, these count for the extra credit thing, everybody. It's just applying logic to actual, like, a real line of thought, not just keeping it abstract. That's what I want us to do. Okay, what time is it? 3:34. Raise your hand if you feel like practicing 7.4. If you want to do that. Okay, I'll rephrase it. Raise your hand if you think that we should practice 7.4? We had a couple votes, okay. I don't really want to practice 7.4. We probably should. I would rather, frankly, keep making arguments and like actually have a discussion where we're applying logic. Let's get like personal, maybe. Okay? I don't know. Let's talk about something we actually believe or care about. Like, so much of the stuff that we've been talking about is like logic is so abstract.
Like anything?
Anything, sure, any position.
Well, I don't know if this is going to start an argument, but anyway.
Well, let's be nice to each other, but let's start an argument and argue.
Well, the argument that a lot of people are arguing is that people were born like their own way. I'm trying to be nice about it. 'Cause
Their own way.
people like a lot of people in the community of like the LGBTQ believe that they were born that way, and people who like don't believe that that's true are like opposing that is not true. Like there's no way that you can be born that way, and the people in the LGBT community are basically saying, well, you can't be born straight. And the thing is like, well, nobody is born either gay or straight. Like you don't start developing like those kind of emotions or feelings until you start growing older and start having experiences. So I guess it would be kind of like cancel out both. Like you weren't born gay and you also weren't born straight because you don't know what either of those mean when you're born.
Okay, can we talk about this as a class? Is this okay? I mean, I don't know why, if you argue about it like professionally or something, in good faith, most things aren't offensive. Now, if somebody comes into class and starts arguing like, oh, I don't know, like maybe we should kill all the Jews or something, or like white people are being replaced, I'm going to shut that down immediately, right? But if it's something really like this, which is a real question that's not obvious, and it doesn't really have much to do with whether you actually support LGBTQ causes or not, it doesn't matter, ultimately, the value of somebody who's gay or LGBTQ, whether or not they're born that way, right? Now, if somebody, just for context, somebody comes in the classroom and starts saying, like, we will not be replaced, that's tacitly an admission that white people are superior, right? So I'm going to shut that down. But this is not, do not take this argument as talking about the value or worth of anybody in the LGBT community. Make sense? Okay, so there's three positions. We'll just call it we'll call it A, B, and C. The first position that you described is that, let's say you are born with your gender and sexual identity. Let's just say you're born with a true gender and sexual identity. Because of course people transition later in life, or people realize they're gay or bi later in life, right? So it's not that you're born being a member of the LGBT community. It's that you're born with some sort of true essential aspect of yourself that's like a gender or sexual identity, right? The other position, I'll call it C, is that you are not born with...
So this is an argument between nature versus nurture, essentially.
Yeah, basically, yeah. You're not born with any true, let's just say, identity, gender, sexual identity, and it is purely a free choice you make as an individual, right? Two extremes. Let's also add to this, and you have no choice in the matter, right? Your identity is not a result of a choice. Make sense how these are two extremes? Now you just described the middle position, didn't you? Even if you didn't realize it. And I think the middle position is,
That you were born like not straight or not gays.
so let's just say you weren't born with let's just say a true identity. Again, I'm just abbreviating that. But that doesn't mean it's a totally free choice what your identity is, right? Okay, so these are three positions kind of spanning the spectrum of what people can hold. You've got one extreme that says you're not born with it and it's just a free choice. It's basically arbitrary, or you're just doing it because of some sort of cultural force or pressures, right? You just wake up and decide one day, I'm going to be gay, right? This one says, no, you're born with this innate sexual gender identity, and it's always within you. It's who you really are deep down, right? That's who you are. And maybe you suppress it, or society suppresses it, but at a certain time, you might realize that this is who I really am, and you don't really have a choice in the matter. That's the other extreme. The middle ground is kind of like, well, it's not a totally free choice, but you do have some choice. It's not determined by nature, by birth, by genetics. But it's also not totally free because it might be influenced by other psychological factors. You know what I'm saying? Can I get it? Okay, so there's these three positions. And again, none of these three positions really matter because you could totally believe this. That's an arbitrary choice you make. I don't see how you'd be able to conclude that all of a sudden nobody should be gay or LGBTQ people are less valued because of the choice they're making. I just made a choice today. I wore these suspenders instead of my tan ones. Does that mean these suspenders aren't valuable? No. Right? So none of these three things really give you support for any sort of mean conclusion, right? Just to clarify. All right. And now what I want us to do, I don't know, I won't make us take a vote to see who agrees with what. But let's play devil's advocate and let's each take up a side and come up with an argument for each side. Or an argument maybe against one of the sides. And let's actually try to argue against these positions or for these positions. Does that make sense? I mean, if you want to say which one you believe, great.
So whether or not you believe in like the science behind it and whatever you believe here, there have been several like scientific peer-reviewed studies that back the genetic like predisposition for certain gender identities, sexual identities, etc. So.
Right. Yeah. So that is true. There are some reasons to think that there may be some sort of genetic predisposition, right? But that's still not the same as saying you're born with a true, robust identity, right? Because a predisposition, you're also born with a predisposition. Everybody in here was born with a predisposition to be biologically male or female, right? Like, because you could have been either in the development process. But that doesn't mean it actually happened, right? So it doesn't mean that just because you have a disposition, it's going to take all the choice out of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that directly impacts C because that's saying it's specifically a choice and there's no other way for that to, yeah.
So I'm just going to tell this A1 for argument 1, a brief sketch, and then we'll try to translate it. So let's just say against C, so it's for not C, and it says something like, there is a genetic relationship or component or cause, whatever you want to say, that determines something like predispositions, right, to LGBTQ identities. Right. Of course, this whole thing is complicated by, like, what are we even talking about? I mean, I know it's popular in pop culture and I talk about, like, identity. I just think, I personally, this is my position, I think the whole talk of, like, identities are bullshit. Like, I don't think any of us really have identities at all. I think we just have a bunch of, like, properties, like, I'm bi, I'm straight, I have certain, I want to associate with what in our culture are certain gender norms. I want to pick and choose part of those. But I don't really think that, like, I don't know, there's a whole problem of, like, what even am I? If I can't answer that question, I don't know how I'm going to have other types of identity on top of I don't even know what a human being is.
I only brought this up because I was giving a tour and I had a transgender, I guess I'd say man, asking me if he could stay in like one of the female dorm, or they were switching pretty much, and they were trying to stay in the female dorms, so I guess it would be transgender female?
Trans woman.
Trans woman, sorry, I didn't mean anything by it. But I didn't personally know the answer because she hadn't fully transformed, and so she had to come to the office and kind of had to talk about that. Now, as to what they told her, I don't know, but I was like, in my head I was thinking, I don't know if that's possible because I don't know if everybody's going to be comfortable, although you are transitioning, and you are like a woman now, you haven't fully transitioned, and so I don't know just how comfortable everyone else will be like in the building when it's time for you to come on campus.
Yeah, like what the university policy is going to be, right?
Yeah.
And especially in Oklahoma, I don't know what the university,
So
I don't know the answer to that either, yeah.
I told her that personally, I mean, since she is transitioning, yes, she could stay in there, but at the same time, if she was to run into somebody who had a like different view of her beliefs, like I didn't want that to go badly, so I didn't want to tell her anything and put her in a predicament where she could possibly get hurt because somebody has an opposing view, or like how she lives, or like her choices in life. So I just told her to come to the office. So that's the only reason I brought that up.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's no real way out of that situation because that person's going to be screwed either way. There's going to be discomfort with being in Oklahoma and having those policies and in a dorm full of young people. I'm sure not all of them are accepting either dorm you stay in, right? Yeah. Okay, so here's the first argument, right? There's a genetic component, and that kind of invalidates it's just an arbitrary, completely free choice. Can somebody think of another argument for or against any of these positions? Or just even part of an argument?
We see plenty enough that social pressures and even like religious trauma tends to repress identity of any kind. So that could be in favor of B, saying that there is an outside impact.
Okay, and that could count in favor of A or B, right? Because that might be indicating that there's some true identity that's repressed in you, or, does that make sense? Or that there's some cultural forces shaping things. So I guess we could say argument 2, let's just say for this one, the only reason it appears to be a choice is because of cultural pressures. Now maybe that supports A, maybe that also cuts against C, right? Maybe we could say for A against C. Okay, somebody give me more arguments. I mean, we've all thought about this, right? How could we not have thought about this? I'll tell you my view. My view is in the middle, right? I think there are all sorts of causal influences on who we are and the choices we make, and we're never totally free. But how would we argue for that? How would we argue for our position? If we can't argue for our position, then isn't a lot of this stuff like the basis of our social movements? But if we don't have good arguments for these things, aren't we building a social movement on sand? Yeah, that's the worry, right? So how can we argue for one of these? I mean, does anybody have an actual opinion? Have we not thought about it very much, or?
I'm kind of with you, like in B. At this point, I really don't know because, like she just said, like there's science behind it, like to prove A, but and then I hear C and I'm like, well, there's valid points from C too, so I really don't know.
Let's just play devil's advocate and get an argument in favor of C. What might that look like?
What do religious influences say in favor of C?
Wait, what do you mean?
Like things like the Bible say it's a sin, so or say it's unnatural.
Oh yeah, the Bible says nothing about any of this sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, in the Bible, like the Christian Bible, like it says like, well, it doesn't say. It's just it says it's one of 17 sins, but that's not, being gay isn't the most deadliest sin. Like a lot of people, like a lot of Christians, especially back in the old times, will say like it's an abomination, and like it's an automatic ticket to hell.
So I guess if you take the interpretation of like any biblical passage that said it's like unnatural or an abomination or something like that, and you say that means it's some sort of perversion of nature, then maybe you can make a case for this. I don't think the Bible says that.
Yeah, it does.
But I guess you could maybe give like sort of the classic straw man of like a fundamentalist argument. What would that look like? I don't even know. Because it's hard to see how that exactly relates to it being a free choice, right?
Right, because I mean, if you say it's an abomination of nature, then that would kind of imply that you're either actively choosing to go against nature and then therefore God, or you don't have a choice in it, but you are still condemned nonetheless.
Yeah, right. But then that doesn't really establish
Right.
whether it's a choice or not, right? So it's like, yeah, we have all these arguments that we like to think people are making, but then it doesn't even deal with any of the topics, right? It's hard. This is hard stuff to figure out exactly what are the relevant arguments here.
I did not mean to make this complicated. You just said talk about something, and that was
No, I mean, but I wanna actually get into an argument like of something real that's going on, right?
this is going on.
Oh yeah, this is definitely going on. I think we're at the tail end of a cultural sort of shift.
You said for an argument for C, like with the Bible, like in the Bible it talks about like free will, so you can make any choice you want here on this earth. But in the Bible, like it has the commandments, and like basically the way in life with God, like how you're supposed to live. And if being gay is one of those 17 sins, and you're like actively choosing your free will, using your free will to be gay, then therefore like you know that it's like a sin, or like you know it's not good, but you're still doing it. So like, I guess that's.
Okay, so the first thing you said was something like this. You said, any sin is a totally free choice. Two, let's just say, and this is a real tricky part, because I don't know where you're going to ever find this in any religious text, because the religious texts that exist now were written before people have an awareness of gender or sexual identity.
And
Like-
were also mistranslated, and they were
Right.
made for this time period.
And that's what
Yeah,
makes
but
it
then-
tricky, because it's like when you go back into the old Christian Bible, like it says one thing, but if you like read the new Christian Bible, it says something completely.
Yeah, because they were like written by different people. Too.
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
and then
they-
like, so
The simplest way to say it is, until very recently, people did not think about gender and sexual identity, just like people did not think of race. So it's like in the Old Testament, you know, when God founds the Hebrew people, the Israelites. Okay, Moses' wife was black. She's not Jewish. I mean, her name literally, it's the Nubian. Like, she's black. Aaron, the high priest of Israel, first high priest, he's a black guy. Moses was like Middle Eastern. So it's like the whole concept of God's people and like Israel in the Bible is not an ethnic or racial concept. Because people didn't think of there weren't racial divisions because the world, outside of the United States, the world is so close together, interconnected, that you have people from Africa, from Europe, from Asia, all just kind of like hanging out, right? So it's a lot of these things aren't like found in religious texts because these are new concepts that we as Western people who are now isolated from holistic ways of living invent to try to make sense of the world, right?
I think a lot of the biggest issues came around like the 19th century, because like before that, things like art pieces or religious texts or persecution just wasn't a thing for a lot of groups of people.
Yeah. Right, exactly. It just wasn't a thing. Yeah.
I think I read something like there's like historical examples of using like they them pronouns for people who don't necessarily conform to either typical gender stereotype. There wasn't like a specific name for people like that, but it existed. It was a thing.
Yeah.
People accepted it.
Yeah, and there's still cultures today where, just things don't divide neatly up into two genders, right? Okay, here's an argument that you were getting at. Premise 1, any sin is a totally free choice. 2, having an LGBT plus identity is a sin. Therefore, having LGBTQ plus identity is a free choice. Valid? Raise your hand if you think it's valid. Remember, valid doesn't mean good. This is why it's important to remember the definitions. So look, I'll do a proof. If it's a sin, then you have a free choice to do it. Let's say LGBTQ identity is sin, therefore, L then F. If you have an LGBT identity, then that's a totally free choice. Valid. Sound? Why? Remember, what's the definition of valid? It's just logically valid. That's not a value judgment on if it's a good argument. Why is it sound or unsound?
Because you have to act. One of those premises have the premises have to be true for the conclusion to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Necessarily.
Yeah. So, which of these premises do you not think is true?
All of them.
Both of them? Yeah, that's fine. Anybody else have thoughts? Why? Someone pick one and tell me why you don't think it's true. Let's just focus on one. Is every sin a totally free choice? What is a sin?
It's like an act against a set of rules established in the Bible.
Kind of.
The sin is like, I don't know, if you believe in like monotheistic religions, then a sin is kind of you going against the moral standards that your God has put in place.
Sure, yeah. So in general, that's the concept of a sin, universal to any of the monotheistic religions, yeah. What's the biblical conception of sin? Anybody know?
Act against God.
No, actually, not quite. It's interesting. The word for sin, when they translate and when people in the church develop the Old Testament, they end up translating from Hebrew to Greek, and one of the words that they use is hamartia in Greek. And that was earlier used by Aristotle, and it means missing the mark. You shoot an arrow and it doesn't hit the target. It doesn't mean necessarily that's a perversion of nature, but it's in some way missing the mark of what we're supposed to be doing.
Like you have a set of goals and you simply missed it.
Mm-hmm.
So like
Yep.
the church just made it, well, if you simply missed it, screw you.
Yeah, the modern church for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's always been the case.
I think, like, I don't know, like, because I'm a Christian, but, like, certain ways of thinking, like certain Christian ways of thinking is just not it. I'm not going to argue this, but, like, the way that they're thinking is just not, it just doesn't seem right, so I can see why a lot of people think, like, it's kind of, like, mystical, or, like, they don't believe it, or, like, it's fake, because even, like, hearing some, like, the modern churches, like, the preachers and stuff like now, I just feel like they just make it sound like some of the things that people do, like, God would just hate them for, and I'm just like, if if God is supposed to be an all-loving God, like, I think he still would love you even while you're not doing what he wants you to do. Like, I don't think he's just gonna send you straight to hell because
I think that's absolutely correct, yeah. I think that's what everybody through history would say up until very recently, too.
I'm not that kind of Christian, like, oh, I hate you, or like, I despise you, or I think you're going to hell because you're doing this, because I could do something just as bad or even worse, and I could be sent to hell for that, while you can get like a ticket in heaven.
So what if your pastor gave you this argument, and you now understand what sin means, that it's missing the mark, or it's some sort of, you're not doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, what would the problem with this argument be then? Look at one. Any sin, any time you miss the mark, that's a totally free choice that you're in control of. It's up to you. Is that true? Why?
Because you don't have free will.
I mean, even if we do have free
If
will.
you throw a dart at the board, you're not deliberately missing. You're trying to hit the board.
Yeah. 'Cause that's,
Exactly.
in the Christian sense, that's where free will comes from.
Kind of, but in the Christian sense, remember there was a fall of Adam and Eve, and that permanently damaged the entire world and reduced our free will. And so there are certain things that miss the mark that we're not in control of. Like, are any of you in control of your education prior to college? But your education fails you, and eventually you'll have gaps in your knowledge that should be fixed, right? You're missing the mark. Is that your fault? Was it your choice? Can your parents screw you up? Can you be abused by somebody and that messes you up in some way? I'm not saying that's what having LGBTQ identity is like. But I'm saying there are plenty of things that people do wrong or miss the mark that aren't free. So this one's just a false premise. So it's automatically unsound, right?
I think the other thing is this particular argument does have a rely on a belief in a monotheistic, and in this case, Abrahamic religion.
Right, because in order to believe 1 and 2, you have to take for granted that religious tradition that says 1 and 2 are true, right? So there's no real way, independently of those, to support these, right? Okay, let's just look at 2. Having LGBT identity is a sin. Again, we could maybe put a question mark here, at the very least, because some people are going to strongly disagree with us if we say this is false. But this is highly contentious, right? This one is definitely false, no matter what perspective you tackle it from. This one, we could at least modestly say, we don't really have a good enough, like, we don't know either way, or people have a lot of opinions, so I'm not going to say strongly it's definitely 100% false, right? Even though I think it is false, but, issue for another day. I won't tell you my full opinions. So, but that's enough to make this argument unsound, right? Just having one false, one not supported well enough. Okay, so we try to give an argument for C. Good. You see how, logic like this stuff actually applies to real thinking? You just have to force yourself to do it. Okay, I want to come up with one more argument before we go for one of these positions or against one of these positions. Can anybody think of anything? What if we went back to this one about the genetic predisposition? How can I argue, let's just say argument 1 again, how can I argue against C by saying that there's some sort of genetic predisposition? Let's say, how do I go from premise 1, there's a genetic predisposition to have an LGBTQ plus identity, to the conclusion that C is false? Or I could rephrase that, it's not a totally free choice. This is often how we think. We have some little tidbit of fact, And we can kind of intuitively see how this might have relevance to the conclusion, but then the issue of the hard part is, how do I fill in the gaps to show how they connect?
Well, C says you are not born with any sort of quote-unquote true identity. But in this case, genetically speaking, there is a factor that therefore you can be born with some sort of identity.
Mm-hmm. Well, but so, do you want to argue that if there's a genetic predisposition, that then you are born with a full identity? Does it make sense?
I feel
That's
like,
too strong, it seems like, right?
yeah, I agree.
But this says, you are not born with any true LGBT identity, and it's a purely free choice you make. So this is saying, let's just say you're not born with it, and it's a free choice. To show this entire position is wrong, I just have to show this is false, right? Which means I could just show one of them is false, right? Because this position C is both of these together. If I negate one of them, then I've defeated C anyway, right? So how can I do that here? If there's a genetic predisposition, how does that tell me it's, let's just say, not a totally free choice?
In this case, 1 or 2 could essentially be you are born.
It's tough. It's tough to connect those dots.
Yeah, because I feel like saying strongly that you are born with a true identity is almost still too strong of a statement.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be impossible to prove too, I think. What could we say? Anybody see any idea how to bridge the gap here? How do genetic predispositions relate to freedom and choice?
Well, I was just thinking, like, it's like eye color. Like, you can't choose, like, whether you have blue eyes or not. Like, so it's kind of the same kind of thing. Like,
Okay.
you have the dominant and recessive genes, and they choose who for you.
Right, okay. So maybe you could say, I think what you're getting at is, let's just say if you are genetically predisposed, I'll just say gen pre, to something X, then you cannot change the fact that you are predisposed, right? Just like if you're predisposed to have an eye color, that doesn't actually, like, people are predisposed to have eye colors all the time, and it actually changes through life. So just because you're predisposed genetically doesn't mean that you're going to have that eye color.
So that could be like the difference of you're predisposed to liking the same sex as you, and in this case, well, you're predisposed to be gay, but later in life you come out as bi, something like that.
Yeah. So, but what it does say is that you don't have a free choice in the matter that you are genetically predisposed that way, right? You can't change your disposition. Well, if you can't change your disposition,
Then it's not free will.
then it's not a totally free choice, right? I don't have a totally free choice in my eye color, even though it is possible to edit my genes and change my eye color, right? Or my hair color. I could do that stuff. But it's not a totally free choice because I'm working with what nature's given me, right? Well, then the conclusion seems to be it's not a totally free choice. Against C. How can I model this with symbols? It's kind of hard. It might involve adding steps just to get it to look right. But Okay, we could just say G for there is a genetic predisposition, right?
If G, then can't read well.
So this is, if you're genetically predisposed to something, then you can't change the fact that you're genetically predisposed.
Okay, so if G, then
If you're genetically predisposed to that, then you can't change the fact.
like
Not F.
Yeah, okay, not F. If you're genetically predisposed, let's just make it about the identity. So, if you're genetically predisposed to some sort of LGBTQ identity, then you can't change the fact that you have that predisposition. 3, if you can't change the fact that you have that disposition, then what is not a totally free choice? Then, let's just say, having the identity is not a totally free choice.
not
What do you see for
then
not a free choice?
What?
C for choice,
Oh,
not
okay.
F, then not C.
Yeah, okay, so if you can't change the fact that you have that predisposition, then it's not a totally free choice. Therefore,
Not C.
valid.
yes.
G, then not F, so I have not F because I have G, not F, then not C, so I have C. Valid. Sound? 1, there's a genetic predisposition to have LGBT identity. It's probably true. Doesn't mean a whole lot. Science can't make value judgments anyway. It's true. It just can't. Right? That's philosophy. 2, if you have a genetic predisposition to something, then you can't change the fact that you have that predisposition. Yeah, that's just obvious, right?
True.
3, unless you change your genetics, which I'm not sure we'll ever be able to change that part of ourselves.
With CRISPR-C9, but
Does that have any effect on the sexual and gender identities?
it can.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Look it up, it's really cool.
Okay, well,
That's why I look at these arguments and I don't know.
Yeah.
You can't change.
maybe that might be something, at least in the future, calling into question. Now, in the past, or right now for any of us who
Yeah,
don't
right
still be
now,
rich,
No.
that's still true.
But that's the
But
scary
it
part. If
might
it
be.
gets to that point where you can alter
Right.
genetics, if you want your kid to play basketball and be tall and have blue eyes or whatever.
Yeah, that is scary. Oh, God.
That is, because I don't want, like, what if I mess up my baby?
I'm
I don't want my baby, like,
worried about
like,
messing up my baby even without that.
7
So.
months, she's
Oh my
saying,
God.
mom, she's gonna scare the shit out of me. Like, I gave you a bottle like 30 minutes ago, where's it?
Mother, I must play basketball now. You have modified my genes to be the world's best
You're not
athlete.
supposed to hit kids, but if my 7-month-old comes in at like 2 a.m. doing that, she just might get punched. Dude.
That's funny. All right, last part
Sorry,
before we
my
go.
comment, the last part, yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to get us off.
No, I mean but that's good. That shows you an argument can be sound at one time and unsound at another, because the truth values of premises change over time. Okay, 3. If you can't change the fact that you have that disposition, then it's not a totally free choice whether you have that disposition.
Well, if 2 is true, then 3 is true. If 2 is possibly true, then 3 is possibly true.
Yeah. Yeah, so that they're related, right? And we'll have to evaluate those. Now it's a complicated question. You just made it so much more complicated.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good. And that's the type of stuff that you wanna always be open-minded and evaluating these different arguments over time and trying to find the strongest one, right? This one still, even if this was true, I don't necessarily think this would be true. It's something like it's close. But if you can't change your predisposition, then you can't change your overall identity?
No,
That's
that's
not
false.
true.
That's false, right? So we'll have to modify it to say, well, but all I'm saying is that it's not a totally free choice. There are influences. And so that's not, if I'm influenced, it's not totally free, right? And that's all we need for the conclusion. So I think with a little tweaking, you could probably make this a valid and sound argument. Now, the interesting little thing before you go, that I'll tell you is, do you really want your social movements and your self-value as a human being in the LGBT community to be based on these type of arguments? Or do you want it based on something more secure? Do you want your status and rights to be based on convincing people with arguments like these and showing them the proof? No.
It's just because people are dumb. They're just like, oh, you're just making stuff up. And I'm just like, what?
Remember what I said, people lack common sense.
They do.
Right.
What the fuck?
And even if they have common sense, if you're going to give them good arguments for why we should be nice to gay people, you're going to have logic. There has to be some other foundation for the worth of human beings
Like,
other than this.
argue like certain arguments because it's like people aren't gonna see my way. Like even if I'm nice or like logically like correct, like there's a like oh you're being this or you're being that. Like you're not even trying to listen to what I'm trying to
But
say.
also, like, why do I have to prove to you that, like, my worth is
Exactly.
Like, why do
That's
I
exactly, yeah. Right.
Unless when I say like about like old Christians, because like I have like people that are in the community of my family, and like to see some of my family members like treat them, it's like, you know, for a 65-year-old woman, I can tell you in all 65 years, you weren't the same. Like you act like you are now,
Yeah.
and you make like my cousin feel like he's about to just like burn, you know.
Yep.
So
I get what you're saying. Completely. Good class. See everybody.
Can I ask you two questions?
Yeah, of course.
So the first question is, I know you were talking about that symbolic logic class, and I am a philosophy major. Are you offering that next semester?
No,
Oh,
so
damn.
they're not offering it till I think maybe next fall, maybe even next spring. But I told a couple people that if they're interested in doing independent study for credit, we can do that.
Okay.
So yeah, if you want to do that, then you shoot me an email. I think we do the paperwork towards the end of this semester,
Okay.
and then even if it's just me and you, we just do a study.
No, I'm really interested in the symbolic logic stuff. Like, this has been really interesting to me.
Yeah.
But
The
also,
advantage of doing the study too is that if you normally take it, you'll repeat all the propositional stuff in this class, which is boring.
yeah.
With the study, if I know you,
Yeah.
if you want my sense, we can skip all this and go straight to more of the next stuff. Yeah.
Okay. And then also, I was wondering, do you have TAs for this class?
Yes, I do. I have one this semester regrading, but next semester I'm not sure what the department's budget looks like, but I
Okay.
could use a TA. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you need a TA, I'm interested.
Okay.
If it's paid or not, I don't care. I just
Yeah.
want to have some experience.
That'd be
with
awesome.
TA.
Yeah. No. Can you email me?
All this jazz.
Yeah, just email me and tell me, like, hey, next semester, can I be a TA? And then two, email me and say, I want to do an independent study next semester, and I'll look into how we get that started, the forms and stuff.
Okay.
If you want to do it, no pressure.
No, I'm seriously, I was kind of skeptical about joining this class at first. Once I saw like your syllabus, how it's like kind of a math class, but not really, I was like, I'm out. That's why I switched my major. Once I learned I can do stuff without math and make some sort of money, I went that way immediately.
Yeah.
But then since I've been doing it, this has been so, and like this is fun. Like I like doing the homework.
Yeah.
It doesn't stress me out. I sit there and it's just,
I'm happy to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I always thought it was fun too. That's why I'm teaching it. But
yeah.
cool.
All right, well, I'll shoot you an email.
Yeah, send me an email. I look forward to it. Take it easy.
You too.